Direct flash can be tricky, and it took me a while to learn it. But today I'm going to show you how I keep it simple while still getting that amazing retro flash aesthetic. I'm going to show you all my favorite scenarios and lighting situations that work best with direct flash, and at the end I'll tell you how I get the same aesthetic with video. Let's go. Okay, so for this look, all you need is a on-camera flash that has manual settings. That's this little dial here that changes your power from full to fractions of itself. The other thing you need is a camera that can also adjust itself with manual settings. And that's one of my favorite things about this look and aesthetic is it lends itself to not having to have expensive equipment. I use these flashes from Godox that are retro. They're a bit cheaper, and the way they put out light is kind of uneven. But I think that adds to it. So you don't need to worry about buying the most expensive flash, the best flash, just use the one you have, or find one cheap on eBay, or I don't know, use some weird retro flashes. They all work. Where you put your flash in relation to the lens and the model is actually extremely important, and it's often overlooked. Now, I think the best way is to put the flash right above the lens. This adds a very subtle but sharp shadow underneath the chin. It's very flattering. It looks really well in portraits. Now, how high your flash sits above the lens, it's a really good way to determine how much shadow you'll have under your chin and how much depth you want to the portrait. Now, a really common mistake I see is people putting their flash on top of their camera just like this, and they're looking for that specific look with the dark shadow under the chin. But they want to do a portrait, so they turn their camera vertically. Now you have a side light that's going to light the face at the same level as the lens. That's not going to give you nearly as much depth on the face. If anything, it'll give you a small shadow on the side of your nose, and it's going to wash out your subject a little bit more. And in my opinion, not as pleasing of a look. Now, of course, this is just a guideline, and if you come up with any ideas where having the subject a little bit more flatly lit makes sense, I mean, go for it. Who am I to tell you that you're wrong? I've just found that the flash above the lens makes a much more pleasing image in general. Balancing the light is going to be one of the harder tasks that you have to do while you're setting up your shot. Now, this is how I do it. I'm sure there's a better way somewhere on the internet from some nerds, but that is not how I do it. So I'm going to show you what works for me. I personally recommend with keeping your flash off, finding the exposure you want for the background and the ambient light. Then you turn your flash on and you adjust your power settings, either bring it lower or higher until you have the proper exposure on your subject. Now, it's important to remember that the distance from your flash affects your exposure greatly. The further someone is, the less light is going to hit them. So be sure to put the subject at the distance you want to shoot at while you're setting up your lighting, otherwise it might change when you move them. This very trendy retro look often has the background underexposed while the subject is just slightly overexposed. It looks really good. This is a part of the process that is up to you, whatever you prefer. But for the sake of this video, that's what we're gonna do. Slightly underexpose the background, very slightly overexpose the subject. That'll give you a very dramatic and pleasing look that pops the subject off the background. Also, going back to that distance thing, sometimes I set up my camera and my light and my flash is just too strong, even on the lowest setting. And in that case, sometimes if it works, I just back up and then we've got a balanced exposure. Now, I want to correct some misconceptions here, and it's that direct flash is actually good for a ton of different situations once you realize the power that it actually has. Obviously, you can do the dimly lit retro portrait, which I love, but also nature shooting against a sunset with direct flash. Those are some of my favorite shots I've ever shot, period. The sunset can be dimmed down to be a perfectly dramatic backlight while still having a crisp and bright subject in the foreground. Oh my gosh, it's like adding tahini to a watermelon. You know, like the watermelon is great on its own, but you put that little citrusy spice on it and it pops. Where you'd normally be struggling to find good light underneath a extremely bright, hot sun, you could add a little bit of this, fill some of your subject in direct daylight, and if you bring up the power enough, you can kind of take down the background a little bit. That fill adds a little bit of dramatic, crisp HDR, but also kind of filmic looking. I don't know. It's one of my favorites though for set photography, as it looks so different from what the actual lighting is, and it shines a new light on the subject. literally.
So we are out here shooting a little bit of a car overheating breakdown scene, but I'm shooting with my ZF right now. There's a lot of people shooting stills, and I really want to differentiate my photos. So I'm using this flash, and in direct sun, I'm trying to overpower it with direct flash as well. I think it'll give it a nice look. Also, this short film is actually about a photojournalist, so I feel like the direct flash look from late 70s photojournalism might lend well to this style.
I think the takeaway for what situations you can use this in is if your lighting is boring, monotonous, or just plain old difficult to shoot in. In those situations, never shy away from at least trying a well-placed direct flash. Okay, so there is a reason that this aesthetic is associated with film photography, and it's because direct flash looks better on film. Now, why is that? Well, with early digital photography, to make up for the lackluster sensors as compared to film, we had some over sharpening, and instead of having a good dynamic range built into the sensor, there would be some processing where they would bring up the shadows, bring down the highlights, and overall just have that not so pleasing HDR look. And with direct flash, it didn't look amazing. Ironically, you're seeing a little bit of that come back now with the return of early digital point and shoot cameras. That's an entirely different aesthetic to this. It's not bad, it's just totally different. So let's jump into this photo that I took on set with Aaron Romo. Shout out to you. He has a channel, I'll link it in the description. But I was photographing our talent here, and I was shooting with direct flash. Now, what I'm gonna try to do is just emulate some of that film look so that we have a more pleasing vibe in general. Now, I normally have presets built out for this, but I'll show you step by step what I'm doing. So first, with the tone curve, we're gonna bring the highlight roll off a little bit lower so there's a less of a harsh edge. I'm also gonna bring the blacks up just a little bit to add a tiny bit of that faded look. I think my overall exposure is a little bit high, so I'm gonna bring the overall exposure down. I'm gonna add some color in the midtones, shadows, and highlights. I'm gonna change some of the hue and saturation of specific colors. I'm gonna crush the dark portions of the image a little bit, bring back the exposure to compensate. I'm gonna add a little bit of vignetting, pull out some clarity, and then finally add some grain. There you go, that's the before and after. In my opinion, it just accentuates that perfect retro film look, and I love it. It looks great. Okay, so for getting this look in video, I'm kind of doing it right now. It's how I've been filming this video the whole time. Basically, what we're gonna do, and we're gonna cut to the iPhone, you just need a small enough continuous light that you can attach it to your camera or the cage on your camera. Right now I'm using a Zhiyun light, but you can use any type of light. There's so many good options right now of continuous LED lights that are very well light. Personally, I think it's good to use a mini softbox or a slightly diffused continuous light, because in video, you have less opportunity to correct blemishes or change anything in post, where in photo, you can always throw it into Photoshop for a quick second, or I mean, even in Lightroom or Capture One or whatever you use, you can do little blemish controls quite easily. Where in video, this slightly softer look, I think helps and kind of gives the same vibe. Now again, with post-production in video, you kind of want to do the same thing, but maybe a little bit subtler, because again, you have less room to push the image as much. But you know, play around with it yourself. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, there's gonna be more videos like this coming around. Just subscribe, fools, friends, fiends, foes, and everyone in between. Okay, bye forever.